Okay, Bismillah. Are we good to go already? Okay. Please wait until I tell you. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. So, anybody have any guesses? Yes. Ibn Khaldun, very close, but not. So there are two people who are considered to be the masters of history in the modern world from the Muslims. Ibn Khaldun is one of them. The second one is our guy today. His name is, okay. All right, tell me some of the most influential, some of the most impactful events in Islamic history. Tell me some big ones, biggest ones. What is that? The conquest of Spain, okay? Mongols, okay? We're getting close. What? Nobody heard him. Nobody understood him. Okay, so we said Mongols. What else? Not Ibn Kathir. It is not Ibn Kathir is a historian. Ibn Athir. That is correct. Okay. So, come on, let me build it up. All right. So, our man today, his name is Ibn Athir or Ibn Athir. He is a famous historian. And he is famous not only in the Muslim world, but actually he's famous in the modern study of history, especially when it comes to the study of the Crusades. The main account that comes from the Muslim side is actually the account of Ibn Athir. Now, Ibn Athir was born in 1160. So if you remember that the Crusades had taken Jerusalem in 1099. They had taken Jerusalem in 1099, and Salahuddin reconquered it in 1188. So when this happened, this event of Salahuddin, Ibn Athir would have been 28 years old. He would have been 28 years old, and he most likely would have seen the rise of Salahuddin in front of his eyes. So, and then Ibn Athir dies in 1233. He dies in 1233, so about, 70 years or so. And who knows what happened in 1258? The fall of Baghdad. Okay? So during his time, the Mongols were already starting to basically rise slowly. And he wrote about the initial entrance of the Mongols into the Muslim world. And of course, in 1258, the fall of Baghdad took place not too long after he passed away. Now, Ibn Athir, rahimahullah, his full name is Izzuddin Abul Hasan Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Abdul Karim ibn al-Athir al-Jazari. So this is something that, mashallah, our Arab brothers still keep, which is having a super long name, right? So he has a super long name as well. He's born in 1160 in a place called Jazirat ibn Umar. Jazirat ibn Umar, which is modern day Cizre, Turkey. In the region of this place called Diyarbakir, his family was very well educated. In fact, they were so educated that there are 3 Ibn Athir brothers, him being one of them, him being the most famous among them. But his other 2 brothers are also prolific writers and scholars as well. Now, Ibn Athir, he extensively studies in Mosul. Now, who knows what is the connection between Mosul and Salahuddin? So Salahuddin is actually from Kurdistan, right? And Mosul is right there. And Salahuddin came up under the Zengid dynasty, which was Imaduddin Zengi. And then after him came his son Nuruddin Zengi. And these were the ones who basically gave Salahuddin, a young man, his initial experiments and initial training from which he learned, and eventually he became, Imaduddin passed away, Nuruddin passed away, and then Salahuddin continued. But actually the groundwork for reconquering Jerusalem was laid by the Zengid dynasty. It was done by them. And it was actually them who sent Salahuddin to Egypt as a, you could say, diplomat. And Salahuddin rose through the ranks in the Fatimid dynasty in Egypt and eventually ended up becoming the de facto ruler of Egypt and eventually becoming the de facto ruler of the Muslim world. So in Mosul, as well as Aleppo and Baghdad, he studies ranging different sciences, fiqh, hadith, Arabic literature. And one of the things about him that even today I was actually reading some non-Muslims reading the books of Ibn Athir and recording YouTube videos, because the thing that stood out about Ibn Athir is that he was so eloquent. He was so eloquent in his writing, and he was so descriptive that he spoke about the conquest of the Mongols, into the entrance of the Mongols in the Muslim world. He spoke about the first crusade. And the first crusade is the one which it happened before his time. Now, Ibn Athir is a historian. A true historian doesn't believe everything he hears. A true historian must be critical of his sources. And the reason why Ibn Athir is studied in modern historiography is because Ibn Athir was a historian of the modern type, which is that he didn't just copy everything that he heard, but he actually criticized his sources. And what does it mean, the criticism of sources? What it means is, for example, if there's a guy who works for a ruler and he writes about this ruler who pays him to write these rosy stories, you have to understand that this man's job is to write rosy stories. Whether they are true or not, that's his job. If he doesn't do it, he will lose his job. So when you read this guy, you must understand that anything you're reading, you can't rely on it by itself unless he writes about something which he doesn't have a reason to write. So if he wrote about how bad his boss was, or how he lost a battle so bad and he did bad strategy, or whatever the case is, now we could say, hey, why is he writing that? That's something to think about. But you would expect him to write rosy stories, so you have to look into that and you have to find corroborating evidence from other sources to see if it matches up or not. Okay? So this is called positionality, and you need to understand the positionality of the people that are writing history before you can accept it. So he was deeply influenced by the political and military developments of his time, particularly the Crusades and the Mongol invasions. Now he spends much of his time traveling, studying, and writing, and he eventually became he did not have an official job, but he was kind of welcomed by the Zengid rulers for being a scholar, being an eloquent writer. So he basically would go and he would spend time in the court of the ruler, the Zengid ruler, and he's basically watching everything that's happening. So people are coming to meet the Amir, he's watching it, he's writing it. He's meeting these people on the side. He's like, hey, let me ask you some more questions about this thing that you related. The planning that's happening for sending out military missions, he is there and he knows what's going on. He knows the people who are planning it. So he basically has a first-hand view of the action that's taking place. And the action that's taking place is, like we said, that he was born 28 years before the reconquest of Jerusalem. And if you remember that the situation of the Muslims was that while the Crusaders had taken Jerusalem, the Muslims were divided into very small countries, states they call them, and they all were not willing to unite in order to make sure that they could protect their own seat. Okay, does it sound similar? So they will basically give up the Muslim cause, but they won't give up their seat. So what Salahuddin actually had to do in the years before he actually turned towards Jerusalem was that he actually had to conquer those small Muslim states and unite the Muslims together before he could go there. Now, these things would have directly happened in front of Ibn Athir while he was alive, while he was a young man, while he was probably writing. Because 28 years old of that time is equal to more like 48 years old of our time, right? So a lot more maturity at the time. So he's watching all of this. His writings reflect his engagement with contemporary events of his time and efforts to document history comprehensively. So he writes a major work which has been translated by many non-Muslim historians. Once again, why did they need to translate his works? Because his works are so instrumental in understanding what's happening from this perspective. How are the Muslims viewing the Crusades? And you know, the Crusades is a very interesting topic in history until today. And people wrote a lot. Most of what we hear about the history of the Crusades is actually coming from the European viewpoint. Very few viewpoints from the Muslim world. And actually there's a book that's in my reading list. It's called Crusades Through the Arab Eyes, or Muslim Eyes, one of them. Crusades Through the Arab Eyes, I think it's called. And it basically talks about how do Muslims view this. And of course, you will see Ibn Athir all over that because his writings are one of the main sources. Now, he wrote a major work, which he completed 2 years before he died, called Al-Kamil Fit Tarikh. What does it mean? The complete history. So he started, just like Ibn Kathir, he started from the beginning of creation, and he wrote all the way up to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in one volume. In the second volume, he started from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and continued until all the time of the Sahaba, and I think the third volume covers up to his time. Now, what he did, interestingly, is that there were three major historians before his time. Three major historians before his time. At-Tabari, Al-Mas'udi, and Ibn Sa'd. So what Ibn Athir did is that he took all of those works and he summarized them and synthesized them. Okay, meaning he took out extra details and he also combined the good between them, and he wrote that in his Al-Kamil Fit Tarikh. And then, of course, he wrote whatever they had not written after their time and up to his time, he wrote about that. Now, he writes another book called Asad al-Ghaba fi Ma'rifat al-Sahaba. And in this, I actually just looked at this book. You know how many Sahaba it has in it? 7,500 Sahaba. 7,500. Now, of course, some of the names are just an entry. And all you have is lineage and a little bit about the tribe, few lines. But the thing is, the fact that he was able to gather that many names. Why and how was he able to do that? Now, remember that the prominent Sahaba that the most of the Muslim world knows about they number in hundreds. They number in hundreds. After that, and when I say hundreds, I don't mean 900, I mean like 200 to 300. After that, we usually just know a name. And that's all. And even sometimes the way we know the name is not because they were mentioned in the seerah, but because they were mentioned in some work of genealogy. Now, how does he get 7,500 names? Because his third major work is a work of genealogy of the Arabs. Okay? So he knows that very well, and he's able to figure out all of this. So, you know, interesting thing, by the way, about genealogy is that unfortunately many of us, we don't pay much attention to it anymore. But and a lot of us are immigrants coming from other countries. But you can actually, with regards to, for example, anybody who's born and raised in America for many generations, you can actually go to your local library and you can track down your family history to extreme detail. You might be able to, if one of your forefathers happened to be someone who entered America through the Ellis Island crossing in New York, you might be able to find their actual immigration card that they filled out, okay? Unfortunately, sad reality is that most of the Muslim world does not keep records like that. The only thing you have is basically going through family preservation, if that. And a lot of us, when we move from one country to another, how many people bring like these type of family history and documents and things of that sort? A lot of it ends up getting lost. Unfortunately, there's so much war and conflict and this type of stuff that happens that a lot of Muslims that are living now in America, it will be very rare to have someone who actually has detailed knowledge several generations up. If that happened already, that happened already. You should preserve something for your future generation. Leave some legacy behind. So your children, your great-grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren will find something about you. And actually, one of the things that I'm planning on doing is a project called the History of the Masajid. And what I want to do is I want to create a template and basically give each masjid this template and say, look, fill out this template. When was this masjid started? Who were the first board members? Do you have any documentation? Put a copy of it here. Do you have any pictures from the first Eid? Put a picture of it here. Every Eid, if you can track down, what was your old building like? What was the first Jummah like? What was your first fundraiser like? Who were the board members? Every single board member. You know how you have, for example, in like school institutions, every year they have a picture of the staff? So every executive committee that came, every board that came throughout the years, document who was there. And if they had any type of initiatives, if they made some major developments or major initiatives that took place, if you document all of that, just right there easily, you would have like a nice book size volume for your history. And each person, each administration that comes should add to it. So that later on people can come and they can say, hey, this is where we come from. This is all the things that have happened. And there's so much that you can learn from that. If you remember 2 weeks ago when I gave this example that the first library that exists, that is known to exist, is simply a place where they found records of how much grain was being produced and how much grain was being consumed. And that alone is so valuable because it can tell you so much about this town where this record was. How many people were probably there? What kind of day that they have? I mean, there's so many things you can learn just from looking at their record of how much food they were consuming. So other stuff that we can add, it can really add so much value to it. So anyway, so he has a major book in genealogy. Now, Ibn Athir is renowned for his meticulous documentation of events and his critical approach to sources. His accounts of the Crusades are particularly notable for providing a Muslim perspective on these conflicts. Now, he passes away in 1233 CE, which is 630 after Hijrah, 1233 in Mosul, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most important historians of the Islamic world. His works continue to be essential references for historians studying the medieval Islamic world. That era, you can't learn about that era in the Muslim world except that you must go through Ibn Athir because of his writing. His comprehensive approach and critical analysis make his contributions invaluable to both Islam and the world historiography. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the tawfiq to learn some of the beautiful lessons and to try to preserve our history just as Ibn Athir preserved the history up to his time and left us some amazing stuff. And once again, you can go and, because a lot of his books have been translated, I actually looked at that some of his books were translated in 1949 or something like that. So in 1949, if you think about what was happening at the time, what was the interest that somebody felt the need to translate the work of Ibn Athir? Okay? Some stuff, right? So, he, of course, Ibn Athir lived in the time of Salahuddin. 1949, 48, what's happening over there? Somebody there wants to understand what's the history of this place. Okay, how did the Arabs deal with it the last time around? So, look at that. Subhanallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the proper understanding. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Nashhadu an la